As the voice of God just told you, I'm Dylan Siegler, and I lead sustainability at GreenBiz Group. I am going to state the painfully obvious. Urgency is growing for us to confront the many crises that we're facing. I'm incredibly impatient. I think you're impatient. I think my guests today are very impatient. And in the midst of all of this, a new wave of climate activism has emerged. And that tension that's created in the ecosystem when activists come in and have different opinions about how we move forward than perhaps some in the corporate space or in the government space might think, it puts a little bit of pressure on the rest of us to make sure that the communication and collaboration that we're putting together is really well-oiled. So we wanted to bring two really fabulous activists here to talk with us about the evolving role of activism, and particularly youth activism, as we confront these crises that we're facing. So I want to give Xiye Bastida and Jerome Foster a chance to each introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump into what I hope will be a really rich discussion. And we have a surprise guest actually at the end. With about 5 minutes to spare before the end of our time on this stage, we're going to invite back up Kate Brandt from Google to actually have a little bit of a dialogue with the activists, because isn't that what we're here to do? Jerome, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Jerome Foster II. I am a climate justice activist. I'm one of the youngest members of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and I'm the co-founder of Waic. Today, I just want to thank everyone for being here and taking the time to listen to youth activists and kind of understanding how we pair climate action with also advancing environmental justice and equity.
And Xiye.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, like Jerome said, for listening to us. My name is Xiye Bastida, and I come from an indigenous community in central Mexico. And I have been involved in the climate activism space for over 4 or 5 years, but my parents met at the first ever Earth Summit in 1992. So I like to say that I was born into the climate justice movement and just really, really immersed in a view of the world that was about how do we build something better. And my community in Mexico was affected by flooding, by pollution, by Mexico City extracting our water. So we really lived at the crossroads of what I see as this system of extractivism that leaves communities in a very precarious stage. So Jerome and I were both part of the youth climate strikes, and in 2019, New York City organized a protest of 300,000 people. So today we are here building on that legacy of mobilization and on that legacy of what the new generation has to bring for climate solutions and building a positive future.
And building on what you were just saying, actually, Xiye, what are youth activists fighting for right now, both on the global scale and I'll get to you in a moment to ask the same question, Jerome. What are you fighting for yourself?
Well, the big picture is that for us, 1.5 degrees of warming, that limit that the IPCC report gave us, that the Paris Agreement gave us, is not just a random number. 1.5 degrees is about justice, because the communities most affected by sea level rise, by wildfires, are the communities that have historically been impacted by a system that has forgotten them. And so the global north, global south conversation, it's not about pitting two sides of the world against each other. It's about recognizing the historical injustices to then be able to walk on this path of meeting that goal. Because 1.5, we see it as this ambitious goal, but in reality, it should be seen as a limit. This year, we already saw what heat waves were doing. We saw the hottest year ever recorded. And so what we're fighting for is that rapid decarbonization across every single sector. And the youth movement, for example, I'm at University of Pennsylvania, and people at my school are saying, already signing agreements, I will not work for a fossil fuel company. I will not work for a company that doesn't have a plan for climate or sustainability. So the tides are turning, and what we also bring as the youth movement is that diversity of perspectives, because, for example, indigenous wisdom, indigenous values of reciprocity, of if I take, I must give back, and those type of things that have been missing from our global conversation are so, so important. So I think the youth movement is something unique. It has never happened before in history that people from all around the world are connected, organizing together, feeding off of each other's expertise, and then thinking of what do we build from here.
And clearly, your background coming from an indigenous community makes that really meaningful to you. What are you personally fighting for?
I'm fighting for joy. I'm fighting for my kids to have a future where they don't have to be scared of a heat wave or sea level rise or moving away because your home was destroyed. And I think that is what we forget, that the climate crisis is violent. The climate crisis is something that will dramatically affect how children grow up. Our chemistry in our brain actually gets affected when you have this type of traumatic events happen to you. So what I want is to protect future generations. What I want is for my children to experience a world that I am proud of the legacy that we build. And I think if we come to the climate movement thinking not what we're upset about and what we're angry about, but what gives us hope for changing the world, that is what I want to bring to this space. And I think all of you here have that in you. So the question now is, how do we work together so that we're proud of the legacy that we bring to our children?
Well said. Jerome, how about you? What does this fight mean to you?
I want to thank you for that question, because I feel like when we talk about the climate crisis, it feels like something is very personal, because growing up as a young person, we kind of understand the history of when you're young, you're supposed to have this sense of hope and the sense of ambition and kind of anxiety about what the future can hold for you. And I think what we've seen is that because of the climate crisis, my generation has fallen to this valley of despair, in a sense. It's fallen into a sense of apathy, because we are fighting for the right to live, and we're fighting for the basic necessity of clean air, clean water, and understanding that profit is not the only thing we should be caring about. We should be caring about communities and families who are at the front lines of the climate crisis, but are being ignored by investment and being ignored by companies who are continuing to pollute in their backyards. I think when we think about what we're fighting for, we're fighting for a call for moral clarity, because especially in conferences like this, where businesses are trying to come to the table and figure out where they can make changes, we're thinking structurally. We're fighting for how do we make sure that companies understand that it's not just about growth, but about development. And thinking about, well, we can't put Band-Aids in the climate crisis. We have to think rooted. We have to think deeply within the structures that govern how we work, and say, if we slightly change the packaging of our product and have greenwashing labels that change the way we market, that isn't enough. We're fighting for ways in which we center communities and have programs in which disadvantaged communities can take part in job creation programs, and empower young people through workforce development programs, and all of those things. That's what we're fighting for. And I think that's why we're continuing to see young people rise up, and that we, in 2019, had tens of millions of young people in the streets demanding that the status quo is disrupted. And we're still here today to demand clear goals and aims for the government to end all fossil fuel subsidies, for corporations to keep pushing and to have more stronger year-over-year targets and intermediate ways of transparency in which communities can hold them accountable. That's what we're fighting for, is for people to understand that the time is now and that we're going to be here whether you like it or not.
I was going to ask what Xiye and Jerome would prioritize if they were the head of sustainability at a big company like Google. But I think let's have Kate Brandt come out and we can discuss that together. Kate? Welcome back to the stage, Kate.
Thank you.
We are really excited to have a dialogue here. Kate, what would you, given the opportunity that we have here, would like to ask Xiye and Jerome?
Yeah, thank you so much for including me in this conversation. It's so nice to meet you both, and thank you for all that you're doing. And I just have to say before I ask my question, I am such a huge supporter of the youth climate movement for many reasons. But one thing I want to share with you is I can't tell you how many senior executives, senior government leaders who have came to me in the last several years and said, Kate, I have to tell you, I didn't always really care about climate or pay attention to it, but my daughter, my son, my niece, my nephew came to me and started talking about what this means to them, what it means for their future, and now I'm ready and I'm listening and I want to know what I can do. So amongst the many things that you're enabling, that is a huge piece of it. So thank you. And my question for you, I think, is a really simple one, which is just for me, for other people from companies in the room, how do we better support you and how do we better engage?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because I feel like it's very rare that we kind of see companies kind of coming out here and then having these discussions, especially on like how we have holistic collaboration in a sense. Yeah. I think one of the biggest ways that we can kind of support the work that we do for each other is to have spaces in which we can inform the work that you do. And that not just young people, but community organizations and people who can ground truth the data that we're talking about is really important, and having them not just in advisory councils, but on the ground with the people that are doing the work, creating these programs. And I think that's really important. I think a lot of it is also being seen and being heard in a way that is supporting the organizations that are pushing for change. Yeah. If you're kind of being activists within Google and kind of pushing them forward, it also is how do we keep pushing them from the outside? And that's by supporting these organizations, funding them, creating ways in which we can have programs that are collaborative in that sense. I think it's really deeper to have a conversation where we can have activists and corporations in the same room and say, hey, we're going to keep pushing from the outside, but you're going to have to push from the inside as well, because we're going to keep knocking down that door, but we got to have people like you that are kind of pushing so we can have those creative spaces in a sense.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
To that, I'll add that a little bit of a story, because I think I learned so much from this, which is during Climate Week in New York City, the World Economic Forum convened 10 activists and 10 CEOs together in a roundtable. And I had never been part of something like that, where we're not just the one youth invited to speak with the chief sustainability officer, or the one youth who gets to speak to the company. It was really a session of listening to each other. And what we first said is, what does it look like, or why is it necessary to have youth activists in conversation with you? The first reason is because we are somebody who will challenge you. And a lot of for example, one of the CSOs asked me, if I want to have a young person, but not necessarily an activist, is that okay? And I said, that's okay if that's what you think your company wants. But the question for you is, do you want somebody who is going to push you to see things that you hadn't seen before? And I think I had a big of a revelation when I understood that CSOs actually see themselves as activists within companies and see themselves as somebody who will push a company to do better. So it's a collaborative effort of then how do you get the perspectives of youth activists and the climate movement to senior officers, to open minds, and say, we are really at a point where the climate movement is exploding in a way where we're going to be coming from every single side. So what are companies going to do to be prepared for that? For example, the EU is banning greenwashing. There's a lot of international policy around rights of nature, around the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, around rights of future generations. So all of these things are going to be legal frameworks that are going to hold both governments and companies accountable. So if companies don't know what's coming, then it's just going to be a mess, really. So enhancing transparency, enhancing dialogue, because if there's no transparency, we don't know what to ask for, and we don't know how to measure success. So I think the key for me is having spaces, like Jerome said, for conversation, for constructive solutions, And also understanding that the pressure will be coming, so then we have to be ready for that. And it's just amazing when the conversation ended with the World Economic Forum, one of the CSOs said, I had never ever thought about having a conversation with a youth climate activist. It had never crossed my mind, and it has actually changed the way that I see my role at my company. Because a lot of the times when there's youth engagement, it is through a youth advisory board. But if there is one meeting a month or one meeting every 6 months, that is not going to be able to push something forward. So I think the key is to have a person within your company that their role is youth engagement. And their role is youth activism engagement. And in that way, you can have that ongoing conversation and ongoing dialogue.
Thank you. Great advice. Thank you. I want to thank Jerome, Xiye, and Kate. I hope this is just the beginning of a fruitful communication collaboration. And thank you for being a part of it.